The transition from military service to civilian life is often one of the most profound journeys one can face. Finding a renewed sense of purpose is key to shaping this next chapter of our lives. And in this powerful episode, I am so honored. I'm going to be sitting down with Colonel Bill Butler. Colonel Butler, how are you doing today?
Great, Teresa. Thanks for having me.
Well, I am so honored to be here. As you guys know, this is my hometown of Columbus, Ohio, and the opportunity to come back here and to see a memorial that is dedicated to the narrative of storytelling and veterans is such a profound honor. And so today I'm talking to the acting executive director of the National Veterans Memorial and Museum in Columbus. Now, this memorial is known as the only museum of its kind that honors all veterans and tells the deeply personal and inspiring stories of those who answered the call to service. Through immersive exhibits, personal artifacts, multimedia storytelling, this museum creates a deeply moving experience that pays tribute to not only the servicemen and women, but also the families who supported them. And as I said in my show notes leading up to the call, this is not just a memorial with equipment and other battles of the wars, but this is more about the lives and the sacrifices and shared humanity from veterans of all eras. And Bill Butler, you bring a lifetime of leadership and service to this museum with deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. You were a stuntman and technical advisor for Black Hawk Down, and now you're dedicating your life to preserving and amplifying the voices of America's veterans. So welcome today again.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
So first off, I always ask my guests who are in the military, what inspired you to join the Army and make this your career?
So my dad was in the Army, served in Vietnam, 2 different tours, and I was a toddler. I was born on his first tour, and I was a toddler on the second. So I didn't really experience that. And I've got some vague memories of him calling from Vietnam when I was probably 3, and the echo of the transatlantic communication cable. So I've got that one distinct memory. I remember him coming home, but then he was in the Army Reserves as I was growing up. So from grade school all the way through high school. And he was in a Army Special Forces unit here in Jamestown, Ohio. So occasionally he would take me out. We'd go watch jumps when they're doing parachuting, or just run around the field when they were doing field training exercises. So I enjoyed that. I grew up playing basketball and football, baseball, wrestling. So I always liked being part of a team,
right,
and on a team. And when I was getting ready to go to college, I was interested in it, but I wasn't quite sure that I wanted to make the commitment. So I went to Eastern Kentucky University and joined the Ranger Club down there. And we were doing rappelling off the football stadium, going out on these field training exercises. I competed to be on the Ranger Challenge team, made the team. And then from there, it was, I got bit by the bug, so to speak. And that's really what I wanted to do. And I remember I was probably 5th or 6th grade, and I was digging through one of my dad's old Foot Lockers down in the basement, and there was a Ranger handbook. And, it's the seminal piece of, a booklet on, Ranger tactics, techniques, and procedures. And I remember asking him, I remember the picture on the front cover. It's a small, a little bit bigger than a 3x5 card size booklet. And I remember asking my dad why he never went to Ranger school. And he said that was the one school he always regretted never having had the opportunity to attend. And so that was kind of another really motivation for me to do something a little bit different, super challenging. And from then that was all I needed was just to be on a team like that. And kind of filled my bucket in terms of having that camaraderie, esprit de corps, do challenging things with others, rely on your teammates and have your teammates rely on you. And then from there, it started my Army journey in 1990 when I got commissioned as an infantry officer, and then retired in 2017.
How did your dad feel when you became a Ranger? Like, what was that feeling? What was that experience like?
Oh, he was super proud. His father, all of his uncles all served in World War II. So one of them, my grandfather, my dad's dad, he was a 31-year-old private in the infantry and the 36th Texas Division. And he was on the first wave of the amphibious assault in Salerno, Italy, back in 1943. Another uncle was in the Marine Corps, fought all throughout the Pacific. Another uncle was in a parachute infantry regiment in the Pacific, the 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment, which coincidentally is the battalion that I ended up commanding as a battalion commander. So that kind of connection to my forefathers, so to speak. But my dad was super proud, and still is. And my son is also an Army captain, attended West Point, and was in the Ranger Regiment as well. And my dad, my father-in-law, our whole family is very proud of our son and our daughter. She's a nurse down in Cincinnati.
It's so interesting because there's so many people that have this generation of those who serve, and then they pass that on to the people who come after them. And you're continuing that tradition now with your son. So I think that's just so absolutely amazing. What was it like for you as you transitioned to say, okay, this isn't just going to be a 4-year stint, 5-year stint. I'm not going to do just my 10 years. I'm going to make it all the way as a careerist in the Army. Did you know when you were your first few years that was going to be your intention?
I always remember having conversations with my family and then with my wife I would stay in the Army as long as I was still enjoying it and having fun.
Right.
And there were two moments where I almost got out. As a lieutenant, I had a company commander I despised. He's just a thoughtless person and not an inspiring leader. And I almost got out.
Wow.
But I didn't. And then again, when I was a captain, I had been in the Ranger Regiment as a lieutenant. I had gone to Hawaii 25th Infantry Division. I was competing to go back to the Ranger Regiment, and I didn't know if the division was going to release me. I was under consideration for a different job at the division headquarters as a captain. And at that point, I was like, well, I'll just get out. If I can't, my dream was to be a Ranger company commander. And if I couldn't do that, then I was going to leave service. So I applied for the FBI. I went through some of the initial assessments and the tests that they had. And I was notified that I was going to go to San Francisco for the first round of interviews for the FBI. And then I got notified that I'd been selected to go back to the Ranger Regiment.
So it just goes to show you that there are so many ways in which our lives just sort of go down these paths, and we think we're going to go this path, and then life sends us somewhere else. And then you've continued to do that. So even as you've transitioned now, which we're going to talk a lot about today, which is to this beautiful Veterans Memorial and Museum, which as I said to your assistant, Mark over there, I said, this is the most beautiful and moving museum I've ever been to, because it's about narrative and it's about storytelling. It's not about the equipment or the battles, or it is, but it's all sort of framed in the perspectives of those who served. Did you think as you were going through the Army that you would end up in such a capacity in the nonprofit world?
Not even close, not even remotely close. So when I was getting ready to retire, my wife and I were, we started a list of places we wanted to retire to and places we knew we didn't want to go.
Right.
So my wife's an Army brat. She lived all over the U.S. as a child and then all over the world with me. And, I grew up in Cincinnati, so I'm from Ohio, and Ohio was on the list of, let's not go there. We wanted to be in the Southeast. We like the weather, just kind of the sense of community, a little bit slower pace of life, that sort of thing. So we wanted to be in, if in 2017, everything would have worked out perfectly, we'd be in Greenville, South Carolina. But we weren't. And I knew that I wanted to, as I transitioned, I felt this draw to have some sort of intrinsic value in what I was doing. So some sort of aspiration to continue to feel like I was serving in some capacity. So when I initially retired, I accepted a position as a deputy director for training and exercises at U.S. Army Africa back in Vicenza, Italy. So my wife and I were empty nesters. Both our kids were in college. And we were in northern Italy, and I didn't get the 3 o'clock in the morning phone calls like you do when I was there as a battalion commander. Hey, sir, sorry to wake up at 3 a.m, but Private First Class Smith just got picked up for fighting downtown. Yeah. So it was pretty idyllic.
You were in your civilian government job.
Had responsibilities, planning and getting funding and resources for the planners to do these exercises on the African continent. So it was great. And then, long story short, there were some, have older parents and there's some health issues, and wanted to try to get back to be closer to my mother as she was going through cancer treatment, and to help her and my sister out, who lives in Cincinnati. And it was really the right time, right place for me. And I'd been a Department of the Army civilian for 2 years, and lo and behold, this position opens up, and it was just one of those things. It was, it was almost like, this kind of like higher being sort of thing was watching out and put me in the right place at the right time. And, I ended up applying for the position here, and here we are almost 6 years later.
I felt that as I was watching your presentation from the Rotary Club, that this was like something that you didn't even know was on the radar. I think you said in the presentation that you saw it in a LinkedIn post.
Yeah. So, I was selected to go to a fellowship in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is February of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And right before the fellowship started, one of my former platoon sergeants committed suicide out of the 900 guys that I'd served with in Italy and Afghanistan for almost 3 years. I was very fortunate for that much command time. And, there were 3 other guys who'd committed suicide, but you could see them spiral out on social media. Just the life choices they were making, right, and their personal circumstances. Yeah. And those 3 didn't come as a surprise. Bobby King's came as a kick in the teeth. He was incredibly successful. He'd been selected for promotion from sergeant first class to master sergeant and first sergeant. He was a first sergeant at 2 different companies in the 101st Airborne Division. He was selected to go to the Sergeant Major's Academy, prestigious. Total rock star. Was selected for promotion to sergeant major, and then he took his life. And it was just, like I said, it was a kick in the teeth. And he was a great friend, a great leader, a great, role model, great husband. He was a father too. And so one of the modules at this fellowship was finding your true north. And for me at the time, it was, okay, what can I do to try and understand veteran suicide, number one, and try and prevent any additional suicides out of the 900 guys that I'd served with. And so I met with the research librarians at this fellowship and was just trying to understand veteran suicide, the underlying issues and causes. And, I was done for the reading for one day, excuse me. And, I was on LinkedIn and I saw the job posting. General Ferreter had posted it, our founding CEO and president. And so he and I had served in the Range Regiment 30 years ago. And I reached out to him, hey, sir, you can just tell me about the chief of staff position here at the museum. And he said, yeah, museum is awesome. It's brand new. We've got this incredible mission, impact the lives of veterans, inspire service and others, that sort of thing. He said, I can't make any promises. Throw your name in the ring if you want, and we'll see what happens. So long story short, flew from Boston down to here for my first interview, and I'm going through the core exhibit space, and I get to one alcove, and there's this life-size photo of 2 guys that I'd served with in Italy. And both of them are wounded, they're bloody, they're walking off a mountain in Afghanistan. And I was like, oh my God. And I pointed out the guy in one of the guys in the photo. I said, that's Sergeant First Class Kevin D. Rice. He's my personal security detachment sergeant in Italy and Afghanistan. I know this guy. So I told him the story about that particular incident and what happened. So for me, it was like, the sign,
personal.
Yeah, it was personal. There's this, and I share that with people when I walk them through the museum. We've had at this point hundreds of people walk through the museum and have a personal connection to it.
Right.
We're a small museum. We opened 6 years ago. We're in Columbus. We're not a tourist destination.
Well, number one, you're not a tourist destination. Number 2, you're not a huge military town. And so that's what struck me coming here 3 years ago. I mean, I don't normally make a whole video about visiting a museum, but this was the one that I did because I'm like, this isn't like military wasn't even a thing in our lexicon growing up. Like I never thought I was going to be in the military. I didn't think that was going to be my life. And so what was it? I guess I want to back up a little, just asking, why was it even created? Like what happened? How did this idea even come about?
So the story goes that when John Glenn was alive, he lived in the condominium high rise, just over on the other side of the peninsula.
Okay.
On the other side of COSI, Center of Science and Industry.
Of course, we all know COSI.
Right. So they lived in the upper floor, and he overlooked what was called the old vets. And this is an auditorium built in the 1950s.
Yeah, the Veterans Memorial Auditorium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you probably went to a concert there when you were growing up.
Of course.
Who'd you see?
I can't remember now. Oh, God.
Oh.
No.
I ask everybody that,
Yeah,
and they had some amazing concerts.
I want to say that I may have just came here to check it out, but I know I remember knowing that it was like an amphitheater of some kind. But,
yeah, so they're Elvis and James Brown and the Who and the Doors and some amazing musicians. So he would overlook this at this point a 50 or 55-year-old building and say, he'd meet with the community leaders and say, we've got to do something about the vets. It's really showing its age, and it does nothing to honor our veterans. So they looked at renovating it, and it was going to be about $32 million to bring it up to code and do some renovations that they were considering. And so he said, you know what, let's do something innovative. Let's tear the damn thing down and build something that's honors and is worthy of our veterans. So that was really the genesis of tearing the old Vets Memorial down and building this place. Wow. And they wanted to share the veteran experience with America. They wanted to inspire others to serve in some way, and not necessarily raise their right hand and join the military, but just make their community better, make their school, their neighborhood, their church better than they found it, work on their piece of the pie, so to speak. And so that's what they did, is they raised $82 million of private donations, got the land donated by Franklin County. And, they built this beautiful museum. And like you said, there aren't a whole lot of pieces of equipment or, vehicles or any howitzers or helicopters or tanks. It's really
that's the majority of museums.
Right.
The majority of military museums you go into, it's very technical about the technical details, which I know many people get into, but I'm not really a hardware person. I come here and it's just, wow, I've had that equipment. I've gone on that deployment.
Right.
I saw those things. I work with those partner nations,
Right.
That's what
it's really, at the end of the day, the Army is about people. And so I think that, and really the military in general. I mean, if you ask, I would venture to guess, if you go into a retired Air Force officer or senior master chief's office, they've got a bunch of pictures of aircraft on their wall.
Oh yeah.
Retired sailors probably have a bunch of pictures of ships that they're on. But if you go in an Army person, soldiers or officers or senior non-commissioned officers' office, they've got pictures of people.
Oh,
and that's really the importance of our military, is the people, the backbone.
Right.
And it's not about the hardware, and it's not about the technology. It's about the people who can operate and implement that technology.
What has it been like? Because you've been here now 6 years. Tell me a little bit about the progression that you've seen in the museum from when you first came here to where we are today.
So I joined the team in May of 2019. So that was the first Memorial Day ceremony that we were going to do, the first one.
Wow.
So, we've got to educate the community on difference between Armed Forces Day, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, those sorts of things, which is, not to be, condescending or anything. It's not a military town, and people don't know. So we did our first Memorial Day ceremony, and then we've tried to implement other ceremonies, and we have. So we celebrate Vietnam Veterans Day, March 29th, and we've, when I redeployed, we came home to, not parades, but you came home to parade fields and the community welcoming you back, family members and signs, and everybody was out there, hundreds of people. When my dad and my father-in-law, who also did 2 tours in Vietnam, when they came home, it was just, they came home.
Right.
And there was no great fanfare. There were no welcome home ceremonies, anything like that. So we do a welcome home ceremony for our Vietnam vets. And we partner with a local high school, Franklinton High School. This is interesting. This is kind of a funny story. So their building was getting renovated during COVID, and they got kicked out of the temporary building for some reason. Their lease or agreement was up, and their new building wasn't going to be finished with the inspections for about 3 weeks. And so they came to us out of the blue and said, we're looking for some classroom space. This building is not particularly suited to classroom space for a high school.
Yeah, sure.
But our private events manager happened to run into the principal who was looking for space, and she said, yeah, we can work something out. We can do this. And we're a circular building. We've only got 2 conference rooms. We've got these alcoves and little nooks. And that's what we did, is we created these temporary classrooms for Franklinton High School. So they kind of adopted us. And so we invite them to participate in the Vietnam Veterans Day welcome home ceremony. So they do, and they'll send over about 15 or 20 kids, and they'll have handmade signs, thanking the Vietnam veterans for their service, welcoming them home, that sort of thing. And so at the ceremony, we'll have 300 or 400 people upstairs in the Great Hall with a central aisleway, and then we have the Vietnam veterans come in the back, but then we walk them up the central aisleway, and it's a standing ovation. And then all those kids are up front with their signs and balloons, so cool. And it makes it special for the Vietnam veterans, and for them welcomed home.
Yeah, I mean, this is bringing something to our city here in Columbus, Ohio, that we just didn't have before. And you'd like to think too, you've probably inspired some people who've come and visited to say, maybe this is the life for me. Maybe this is something that I had not considered. And that's the thing. The museum is not just you come and you have this immersive experience with all the stories and then the timeline that wraps around the building, and then the different exhibits that you're having now. You have this beautiful glass shroud exhibit down in the basement with the different pieces that, I mean, to think somebody just went all over Europe and picked up these pieces and wrapped them all up and then sent them back. I mean, it's just amazing what people will do in the art of storytelling. I mean, you've probably just met some incredible artists and people throughout this journey.
Yeah, artists and people. And, Robert McDonald, he was 99. I'm sorry, he was 92 years old when he met with the artist in 1992. Wow. And like you said, he had all these pieces of glass from his World War II experience in 1944, 1945. And, if it were not for him, number one, being a pack rat, and number two, and hanging on to these things for 50 some odd years. But then number two, having the forethought to categorize and catalog it, and then write in his journal, his perceptions and feelings of, all the different places that he had collected these shards of stained glass from destroyed cathedrals and synagogues, and then met with the artists, and then they created these, beautiful works,
beautiful pieces of art. I mean,
and the neat thing too is it also tells his story. So it's not just these pieces of art that have been created from the shards of glass, but it's the story of him going to Berchtesgaden, Hitler's eagle's nest, his vacation lair, if you will, and what he was thinking as he was going through, at the end of the war. Hitler's dead, the war's over, the cataclysmic event, he survived, and then just, kind of, reminiscing on his experiences of 18 months of, as an army chaplain in World War II, and, just destroyed town after town after town, and England and France and the Low Countries and Germany, and then what it meant to him. But then, you've got these beautiful works that are created, and it's almost like kind of the phoenix out of the ashes story, that, these works of from destruction have been made into beautiful pieces of art.
And that's another thing that I think is so unique about this museum, is the fact that you also don't shy away from the hard parts of war, and from the parts that are not fun to deal with, and the PTSD and some of the pain and the trauma. But then you also show some of the beautiful things, like the homecomings and the camaraderie, the teamwork, the grit that it takes to serve. And I think that's the full military story. And people don't know that.
Well, if you think about it, less than 1/2% of America serves in the military. So that's out of 330 million people living in our country. That's a very, very small number. And it's important for the nation to understand what we're asking of our young people and our military to do.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I think that the camaraderie that can be formed from having a museum like this. And so tell me a little bit too, you also do, I was reading in your annual report, you do storytelling sessions and things.
Yeah. So we've done, back to one of the earlier questions is, when I first joined the museum, our website had newspaper articles about the building and the construction of the building and the opening of the museum and the awards in Architecture Digest that had won for the unique design. But that was it. There were no stories of service. and servicemen and women and what they experienced or what they did in the military or after the military when they got out. And now we probably have 400 stories, if not more, online, whether they're, podcasts like this, interviews or written stories or submitted stories that, veterans have written down and shared with us to be able to share with the community. And there are just some amazing men and women out there who did incredible things in service, or even more importantly, did incredible things when they left service to give back to their community in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just a feel for the museum throughout the journey as you walk along that timeline, and then you see certain things on the timeline, and then you can go over to the other side and see all the artifacts and all the things that remind you of a certain point in history. As this was being designed, I'm curious, was there sort of this intentionality of sort of also just telling the story as somebody is walking and then seeing that timeline?
Yeah, so Ralph Applebaum is the museum designer, and he's famous for having built the Holocaust Museum, the African American Museum, the Smithsonian National World War I Museum, and dozens of museums around the world. He's a world famous designer, and he wanted it to convey that sense of selflessness. The 4 foundational pillars that we have were in large part identified by John Glenn and veteran focus groups that he had chaired in its honor, connect, inspire, and educate. So honor veterans and their service and the sacrifice that they and their families make, connect America to her veterans and veterans to their communities, inspire service in others. And again, it doesn't have to be military service. We just want people to be good citizens, good neighbors, and then educate. We do that through field trips, but we also do it with a great partnership with the John Glenn College of Public Affairs at Ohio State University for a graduate level course that we co-instruct with them and have for 6 years. So, the idea is, we really want people to come in and have an unfiltered view of what the military is like, but then, the good and the bad, because it's, certainly not all through rose-colored glasses that we look at our service. But then, you come out, you transition. Sometimes that's easy for folks. Sometimes that's challenging. And, it kind of gets at this, you've got these veteran service organizations, American Legion, VFW, you've got these newer ones, Team Red, White, and Blue, Mission Continues, Team Rubicon, these organizations that are out in a much more deliberate way, engaging with and interacting with and doing things in their community through physical events or construction projects or what have you. And for some veterans, that meets that need, that connection, that camaraderie, that sense of purpose that they're looking for. And others go to school, they, join clubs, they raise their families, others join the corporate world if they already have degrees, but then they can still have that camaraderie through the veteran service organizations that may be in their communities. Absolutely.
As we sort of close out the call, is there anything else that you want people to know about the museum that is new or is different, or as you guys are looking forward, some of the initiatives and things that you want to focus on going forward?
Yeah, so we just announced over Veterans Day ceremony our partnership with StoryCorps at the National Public Radio. And so, the idea is we don't want veteran stories lost to history. We don't want veterans to take their experiences to the grave with them because everybody's service is important. Whether you were in combat, combat training, overseas, not overseas, in combat arms or in, combat service support, combat support branches, the machine can't run without people. Everybody plays a part. Absolutely. And so we want people to share those stories, and we want, young people to interview their grandparent or their aunt or their uncle who may have been in the military. We want neighbors to interview the guy or the gal down the street who they know is a veteran and have that conversation with them. So number one, the stories are captured. They go to the Library of Congress as part of their American Folk Life project. And then, the other hope is that young people then have these stories and then either, learn about service or maybe dispel some stereotypes or rumors or misinformation that is out there about, what military service is or isn't. And then really again, at the end of the day, it is they learn that, it's not I, me, and mine. It's we, us, and our, and what can everybody do to make our community better.
Yeah.
And in so many ways, service to your community is service to your country.
Absolutely. I always say to people, we all can do something,
Yeah.
no matter how big, no matter how small. We can run a support group. We can participate in an online chat that's helping others. I mean,
Right.
there's so many ways to do something that's of service to others. And so I do thank you, Bill, for your service and for giving me the opportunity to have you on the show today, and tell us a little bit more about where people can find you, and a little bit more about where how to get on over here to Columbus.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again. It's my honor to be part of it.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to go full screen real quick here, but thank you. And thank you all for the opportunity to bring this podcast to you. I am so honored to be here. It'll be my last show here in Columbus, Ohio, but been a wonderful trip, and I will see you all later. Take care.